I know this is now 2 videos in a row about Superman and Lois, but I was kinda late for the previous episode, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't really expecting to make this video since, you know, you got Gotham Knights and The Flash and this show, 3 DCCW shows all coming out within 2 days of each other, and I wasn't expecting this episode to be as good, but I was absolutely, positively blown away by this episode. It's not just as good, but it's better in basically every conceivable way. This episode, based on this first viewing, is maybe my favorite episode of this show ever, with the only competition being a brief reminiscence in between cataclysmic events from season 1, so I guess this episode is a very close second. Just from start to finish, it was a non-stop assault of incredible writing, great acting, insanely impressive visuals, and action that puts the rest of the network to shame, and then an onslaught of one of the most emotional stories I've watched in superhero media ever. This video is a review and mostly just appraisal of Superman and Lois Season 3, Episode 3, titled In Cold Blood. The episode started off with an absolute bang right out of the way with this dream sequence. It was pretty clearly a dream sequence, so there wasn't that little twist in the episode, but it didn't need that twist. The scene still looks incredible visually, and where the previous episode lacked Superman action, this episode excels at it. Every bit of action in this episode, and there's a lot of it, is beyond what you would expect from the CW, which is just what this show does best. It's a CW show technically, but it's not a CW show, if you catch my drift. The dream sequences looked amazing visually. The scene where Superman flies off from the DoD at top speeds towards Lois when he hears her scream, before then barging in by destroying the ceiling. It was a genuine cheer moment for me. I gotta say, it felt amazing. It's been far too long since one of these shows made me feel that excited. I genuinely audibly cheered like I was in the theater watching Avengers Endgame or something. It's incredible. I love Superman. Superman and Steel teaming up was also really cool. It was a bit brief, but it didn't feel brief. The whole section of the episode was so jam-packed with exciting action that I didn't really feel disappointed when Superman and Steel only teamed up for like a minute, because there was so much going on. It was just so exciting from start to finish. And it wasn't just Superman either. Honestly, while that was the cheer moment, it wasn't the best action scene in the episode. The best action scene doesn't actually involve Superman, it involves Jordan and Steel as well as John. The scene where John walks towards his car in this one-shot take, where Jordan and Nat pick off the thugs in front of John, was just mwah. It was incredible. For me personally, and I acknowledge very popular opinion, but there's nothing that tops one-shot action scenes. Daredevil is known for it, and it had basically the best fight scenes in superhero media. Arrow did it a few times, and those scenes were also great. It's just peak action. This scene in particular felt a little bit more than that. It was a bit short, but it's made up by the fact that it kind of feels like a video game. John is the playable character who's trying to get to the other end of the room, and to beat the thugs, he could summon one of his teammates to take out one of the enemies. I think that Guardians of the Galaxy, the video game, did that. It's so immersive in this scene. It's so well shot, so well put together, and this episode's action in general showcases Superman and Lois's uncanny ability to circumvent the typical CW-isms, and instead, it looks like a high-budget movie with great visuals, and with this fight scene or action scene in particular, very creative cinematography. I cannot praise the action of this episode enough, so let's move on to everything else. This episode just takes no breaks, going right from the opening dream sequence right into an emotional montage, which last episode did a couple of times, which continues the emotional story about Lois. The montage showcases Clark and Lois telling basically every character on the show about her cancer. It's a beautifully emotional scene, which is really where I realized, and this is just the second scene, this episode's going to be something special, probably better than the previous. I mean, the episode just started, literally the second scene, and I'm already crying. In particular, the scene focuses a lot on Sam Lane, and very rightfully so. That was the correct decision. Sam asks if there's anything the Kryptonian technology can do, which I'm glad he did because it shows how aware the writers are of the questions the audience is going to ask, because I saw a lot of people asking this question, And this just answers it right off the bat. The answer is no. In this scene, we see Sam basically go through every stage of grief in his reaction to his daughter's sickness, and Dylan Walsh, the actor who plays Sam, does an incredible job which allows this heartbreaking scene to hit every emotional beat it intends to. And obviously it doesn't end there. Like I said, the episode is an onslaught of emotion that surpasses the previous episode in every way, from small things like John and Jordan making Lois breakfast, which is a nice and cute scene, to much bigger things like the main plot of the episode, which focuses on Lois prioritizing the case over her health. This affects Clark, which connects to his dreams, feeling powerless, like there's nothing he can do despite the fact that he's Superman, or Chrissy feeling guilty of being an accomplice, both sides of which are portrayed really well by Tyler Hoechlin and Sophia Hasmick, and the arguments with Lois that come out of this are written really well. The script is just so tight, everything feels so realistic. This goes for Lois's part of the story as well. Chemo is scary, subconsciously pushing it off by creating excuses for yourself is another extension of the surprising maturity this show has lent to this storyline, a storyline that needs that level of maturity that I would not have confidence in any other CW show to give it. I'll be honest, initially I was a bit worried that if it dragged on for the whole episode, I might get a bit annoyed with Lois's stubbornness, but they managed to circumvent that as well with two scenes. The first one is where Lois waits for her treatment, and it's shown from her perspective, where it seems like she's having a panic attack, maybe going a bit crazy. She simply cannot handle doing nothing when there's a job to be done, and we actually see her create that excuse for herself. There's no dialogue either, it's all just shown from her perspective, which is really the scene that stuck everything together for me in this episode. Clark and Chrissy's frustrations are understandable and on full display, but Lois's anxiety and fears are both of those things as well, making for one of the most realistic episodes of this show, which really complements the heavy topic. This comes to a head in this second scene, where Lois explains everything to Clark in a fantastically written scene, incredibly acted from both lead roles. I mean, god damn it, this show has been knocking it out of the park this season, and you absolutely love to see it. Just like how this episode excelled in action where the previous episode lacked, it also has much better side storylines surrounding the supporting cast. It does help that most of it connects to Lois and the main storyline, but nothing means anything without execution. Nat and John Henry's story reminded me of something that I kind of forgot about, which is that Lois Lane was their mother or wife on their Earth, and showcases some of the psychological effects that might have on them. I'm glad they focused on it in this episode because I think there's a reason I forgot. It feels like something that's been glossed over for a while now, but it's incredibly important for the characters, and kind of crazy when you think about it, because biologically speaking, Nat is John and Jordan's half-sister, and I'd like for them to emphasize that a bit more. They are definitely coming together as a friend group, which is great, it's a lot of fun to see, but I think it would be interesting if they really focus on the fact that Nat is kind of their sister. The story doesn't focus on that at all, and instead more so focuses on John Henry's perspective on things. It can be easy to forget, but what he must need to go through when it comes to Lois sounds brutal, so I'm glad this episode focused on it, and it did it well. John has his own thing with his girlfriend and his truck being stolen by her dad, which is mostly separate from the main plot, but does connect to Nat and is a generally effective story arc, which, alongside Nat's story arc, gives us the best action scene of the episode, even though Superman is not there, and this great moment at the end where it feels like all these storylines that I've mentioned up until this point come together, where Lois leaves her house and sees all of these people, and then Nat gives Lois the watch that they made and were searching for throughout the episode, which was a moment that I absolutely loved. The most disconnected story was with Lana, Sarah, and Kyle, which isn't surprising since this family does kind of always feel the most disconnected, but I gotta say, I kind of like this. This might be a bit controversial, but I like this storyline quite a lot, actually. Sarah and Lana's argument and everything leading up to it, and I'm gonna use this word yet again, but it was very realistic and very well written. It's a tough thing to watch, but it made me audibly gasp, and it's honestly one of the most interesting things they've done with this family in a while. This is another heavy topic like Lois's cancer, where it's written so well that it just feels so real, and you connect to it a bit more because of it. Again, I'm aware this might be a bit controversial, but I think it fits the emotional levels of the episode, and as harsh as it is to say, It is the most interesting thing they've done with this family, which showcases Lana's flaws and insecurities that comes off as very genuine. Kyle too, I kind of felt bad for him in this episode, and I felt bad for Sarah as well. The scene with Kyle and Chrissy sold me on their growing relationship, and him talking about his father made me connect to him in a way I just didn't before. Maybe this type of storyline is something that this family needed because it shows everybody's flaws. We've seen Kyle's flaws in the past, now we're seeing Lana's, and it's just handled really well. Things like this happen all the time in real life. I don't necessarily think we need to avoid them altogether, and I don't necessarily think it means that Lana is a terrible person. I think that she genuinely regretted it, and we saw that in this episode. All of that is to say that every main character is used very well in this episode, which goes against the notion that there are too many characters. Sure, some characters like Jordan got less to do, and one episode doesn't prove anything. Plus, Bruno Mannheim didn't appear, although he kind of did in spirit. He definitely affected the episode and was a big part of Lois's decision making. But just looking at this one episode in a vacuum, the issue of the show having too many characters, it just doesn't exist, which is definitely a plus for the episode in particular. So I'm gonna end this review here. I kind of already summarized my thoughts about this episode in the beginning of this video, but I'll just do it again. From start to finish, this episode doesn't let up for a second. The emotion is palpable, the action and the visuals are incredible, the writing is astounding, the acting is amazing, every character and every story is important, and it's all held together by the emotional core of the season, which for this season is Lois's cancer. This episode made me cry, this episode made me audibly gasp, and made me audibly cheer. In my mind, this episode can't possibly be any better, and as such, I'm giving it a perfect 10 out of 10, which I think is like maybe only the second 10 out of 10 I'd give for this show in one of the episodes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is for a CW show. Most of these shows wouldn't even have one 10 out of 10. The Flash and Arrow do have a couple, but compared to the amount of seasons, Superman and Lois is doing pretty well. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.